As you can tell, this is our first event here. We still have workmen in here. In fact, I think some of the audio visual we're still working on this week. But we're very proud of the building, and we're very grateful to Stan for endowing this. You know, Stan, when I watch that video or I look at the artwork in this building, it's his artwork. And when I watch that, I think back to him. And Brad Lager with the Herzog Corporation is here, who runs the company. Our friend Jeff Rose here, all three of us and many others. Stan was a real mentor in our careers and had a big impact on where we are today. So he left a legacy in more ways than one. So we appreciate that. We just want you to kind of enjoy this and being the first people here. I also want to mention that Jay and Katie Ashcroft are here. Jay's our Secretary of State. Katie is, more importantly, Katie is involved with a school that we're supporting in Jefferson City. So I want to make sure I note that. As you might have gathered from the film, my name's Todd Graves, and I'm honored to serve as the chairman of the board of the Herzog Foundation. We're so glad that you could all make it here tonight. And this is our first event in the facility, and I can't think of a better way for us to start in continuing Stan's legacy than to start with Betsy DeVos and the National Review. Our hope is that this is the first of many events that we hold right here in Smithville, Missouri. We want to bring thought leaders and experts to the foundation on a regular basis to discuss the most pressing issues of our time, which is the education of our next generation. When you think about it, Stan set this as his path for his legacy probably 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I can't remember exactly when. But we have landed at this spot in time with this endowment and this mission when we landed at this spot in time for the first time in my lifetime that I know of that people are really questioning the value of public education. And I think it's not by accident that we are here with this mission at this time. The Herzog Foundation's mission is to advance and support quality K-12 education. We carry out our mission by training Christian school leaders, educating parents about successes in Christian education and failures in the public system, and providing scholarships to students. We also hope to spark discussions that will lead to real change in our nation. Students will never be able to reach their full potential as long as they're held hostage at a failing system by teachers' unions and other special interests. The book that you all received tonight hits directly on this issue, which is why it's my honor to introduce the Honorable Betsy DeVos. Betsy is a leader, an innovator, a disruptor, and a champion for freedom. She's the nation's leading advocate for education freedom for students of all ages, having served as the 11th United States Secretary of Education in the Trump administration from 2017 to 2021. For more than 3 decades, she has tirelessly pursued reforms that get government out of the way and allow students the freedom, flexibility, resources, and support that they need to choose where, when, and how they learn. Her advocacy has helped create new educational choices for K-12 students in 25 states and in the District of Columbia, and expanded post-high school education options for students and adult learners alike. Betsy and her husband Dick are proud Michiganders. I didn't say that right, but it's close to Missouri. Leading our discussion tonight is Jay Nordlinger from the National Review. Jay is a senior editor of National Review and a fellow at National Review Institute. He writes about a variety of subjects, including politics, foreign affairs, and the arts. Since 2002, he has hosted a series of public interviews at the Salzburg Festival. He writes a column called Impromptu for NationalReview.com and is the host of 2 podcasts, Q&A and Music for a Wow. He is the author of 2 books, Peace, They Say, a history of the Nobel Peace Prize, and Children of Monsters, an inquiry into the sons and daughters of dictators. Jay is also a native Michigander and currently resides in New York. Thank you for attending, and I hope you all enjoy our discussion tonight.
Hello, everybody, and thank you. Do I sound mic'd? I'm naturally loud, I'm sorry to say, but better to be mic'd. I have a few notes. I'm not checking my email. I have a few notes on this phone, and Betsy DeVos, I bet you were a good student. I bet teachers liked you a lot.
Well, First of all, good evening, everyone. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here and to be the first official event here. What a privilege. Thank
We're
you.
christening the ship.
I know, it's very exciting. I was a reasonable student. I was probably also what you would describe as a pretty bored student. There weren't too many classes that there weren't too many classes that I took that I said, wow, I cannot wait to go there the next day. I had a couple of really great teachers that were very memorable for different reasons, but I think I, like many others, had just a sort of okay experience, and that was a long time ago already. And today it's, fundamentally the same for so many of them, and it's not right. We can't keep doing it this way.
Well, I was going to ask you, should there be public schools? But then it occurred to me, what is a public school? A government school, as Milton Friedman said, a taxpayer-funded school? Other schools are in a sense public.
That's right, but I like to actually broaden the definition or the traditional definition of a public school. I think any school or any educational environment that helps prepare the next generation for leadership in our country does a service to the public and therefore is in some way a public school. I view the schools that we traditionally call public schools as government-run public schools, but we can distinguish that from a whole host of other opportunities, Christian schools included, as being ones that really prepare young people to take their place in the next generation of leadership.
I personally am a big school choicer. I'm a DeVosian all the way. I like to think I was that before it was cool, if it is cool now. But one thing I've always wondered, I think of the phrase, the school of last resort. The school that has to take the kid really hard. What's that school?
In an education freedom environment, I'm not sure there is a school of last resort, because I'm pretty confident that given the ingenuity and creativity and entrepreneurship inherent in our country, within a very short time of true education freedom, there's going to be the right kind of school for every kind of child. And we are living with a system that is 175 years old. It's remained fundamentally unchanged since the time of Horace Mann's creation of the system. And I want to refer to the title of my book, Hostages No More. Provocative, meant to be provocative, because it's a real direct reference to Horace Mann's quote when he said that educators are entitled to look upon parents as having given hostages to our cause. And I think the last couple of years, parents across the country have realized just in how many ways their children's education setting has been holding them hostage in some way. And so I just really believe that unleashing the creativity that we have here in America will result in a whole host of different kinds of opportunities and environments. I think about a little school in West Michigan where I'm from, and Todd, Michigander is how I refer to. Some people say Michiganians, but I think not.
That's a new fact.
Michigander. A little school in West Michigan that's actually part of the school system that I went through in Holland, Christian schools. They have a little school called Forest School, and the kids there go to school year-round, outdoors, every day. Every day, middle of the winter, snow, rain, sleet, and they love it. And there's a waiting list to get into that little forest school for the early elementary grades, and they're adding a grade every year. I use it as just an example of how we can and should begin thinking differently about how kids learn and what actually turns on that spark in them to really be excited about their learning.
Well, so much goes into education. There are schools, of course, sports teams, Cub Scouts, Girl Scouts, churches, etc. And we were talking earlier, and I was thinking of the much mocked phrase by the likes of me in the 1990s, I think. Oh my gosh, we made sport of this. It takes a village to raise a child. But you know, in my later years, I think it's kind of true. Teachers in schools can't be the whole ballgame. It takes the cooperation of the community. And I feel a little bit defensive of teachers because they just can't do it all, especially with broken homes and so on. So I'm not really asking you a question, but I've given you a topic you've addressed many times, and maybe you could now.
Well, first of all, I think teachers are, their profession has been dishonored in a way that is really, really sad and concerning. I think it's been dishonored by a system that has just considered them a commodity. And we're seeing today the frustration of many of them, particularly having navigated the last couple of years. And again, looking ahead and forward to an education freedom environment, great teachers are going to be such an important, a key part of that equation.
Do they have too little latitude?
Very little latitude.
I think the teacher should be the boss of her classroom, even if I don't like her, really. I think they should have a certain freedom to run the show.
Absolutely. And you know, when I was in office, I was really curious about, I heard about the fact that there were many teachers, after they had been named Teacher of the Year in their state or their district, and they'd done their year's victory lap in their given state or district and gone back to their schools, and then within a few months they left teaching altogether. And I wanted to understand why. I had some notions of why that was, but listening to them, almost to a person, it was, you know, I had this recognition, it was great, I had my moment, and I thought when I came back to my school that I would be tapped to do some additional things, or I might be asked, what did I learn? Or I might have new opportunities to help others in some way. But instead, I was essentially told to get back in my box and to be on, you know, page 32 of my, my classroom book on that any given day. And I still remember one young man who said, he was a second grade teacher, and he said, you know, I just got so tired of hearing, keep it down, you're having too much fun. And I thought that was just tragic, that here, they obviously were doing a good job, they got recognized for it, and yet a few months later, they're no longer doing what they loved. And I think about how many other teachers there are like that across the country who we need to bring back off the sidelines, but I think we do that in a way that will help each of them find the right fit for their teaching style, for things that really energize them as well. And I think that we will have a whole different environment when teachers have the same kind of freedom that families and students should have to find that fit and choose the right place.
Well, Betsy DeVos, an old issue. All the important issues are old issues. They never really go away. But the federal role in education, that's something to ask a former Secretary of Education. I think it was established in the department in the Carter administration. Reagan ran pledging to abolish it. It grew and grew. People like me loved what Bill Bennett did with the office, and so on and so forth. And I guess it's here to stay.
I don't know about that.
Well, let's hear about that. I think of education as a local matter, but I think I asked you this before about the federal role, and you said, well, there are certain regulations and statutes and so on. What is the federal role?
So I maintained when I actually went into office and said multiple times while in office, I would be happy to work myself out of a job and see the department close down. And I have said it multiple times since then. It's gotten repeated a little more frequently. And I think there's actually a little more energy around it today because of what people have seen and realized about a system that has literally failed millions and millions of kids. As you said, the department was founded in 1979 as a payoff to the teachers' unions for them having endorsed Jimmy Carter, the first time the teachers' unions endorsed any presidential candidate. And that was established then with the goal of closing the achievement gaps. Not only after more than $1 trillion at the federal level alone, not only has that gap not closed or narrowed one little bit, it's actually widened by most measures. And so one has to ask, why would we keep doing the same thing and throwing more and more money behind it and expect a different result? Instead, the model needs to change, and the funds need to be directed by the families. And we know that only 8 or 9% of the overall funding for K-12 education comes from the federal level. The rest of it is from state and local, revenues. And so, what the imprint that the federal department has had on education across the country, we've seen again in this last 2 years the heavy hand of the system tipping in favor of adult issues and not in favor of kids and their needs.
Well, I've said many times that Betsy DeVos looks like a nice conservative West Michigan lady, but actually she is a radical. She's an anti-conservative in a sense, because she wants to overturn a long-established system that everyone is used to. So what I'm going to ask you now is, what do you want? I mean, say you're czar for a weekend, and you can rule. What do you want? What are your top 3 reforms, let's say, if you could just decree it?
Well, I would say when it comes to K-12 education, it's very simple. It's that every state passed legislation to fund students, not systems. And I use the metaphor of a backpack. Kids go to school every day with the things they need for the day. Metaphorically, we should attach all of the funds that are already expended on that child, or theoretically expended on that child's education, on that child's backpack, to take to the place or places that are going to, fulfill the goal of unleashing that child's potential and learning. That would have, if every state were to adopt that posture and policy, and I would argue in the form of education savings accounts, because they're the most flexible and they're able to use them to essentially customize a child's education. If that one thing happened for K-12 education, that would so radically transform what has been going on for decades, and we would see results and changes and creativity and a whole new energy around kids and their future that we haven't seen since the system has been invented.
Let's go to college. Let's go to higher ed. And you know the expression, he who pays the piper calls the tune. Now, I know there are some colleges that don't accept any federal funds, and they are independent. They're still U.S. law to obey. But if a college or university receives federal funds, should Washington have a say in what goes on in those places? I think so, but I'm not. But you've studied this a lot and worked in it.
Well, again, I think the role of the federal government in education has extended far too far into the affairs of states and locales, and certainly, into the family itself. When it comes to federal funding for education, there's so many different facets of that you may be referring to. Starting with student lending. I firmly believe the federalization of student lending that happened in 2010, ostensibly to pay for Obamacare. The federal government thought, private lenders are making money off these student loans. We can make money and we can do it better. No, miserable failure. And we're seeing it today as the student loan balance ticks up. I think it's over 1.7 trillion today. And as President Biden talks about forgiving billions of dollars of student debt, the whole system of federalizing student lending was ill-founded and it's not sustainable. And even if Biden's move to forgive student debt were legal, which it's not, it's a horrible policy. It doesn't fix anything. The underlying issues will still be there. And it does nothing to hold schools accountable for the results of what they're providing students in any way. It will only serve to fuel the continued rise in cost of higher education. And what student is going to not take out a student loan next year and say, I'll just take out as much as I possibly can because the federal government's going to forgive it ultimately anyway. If they did for ABC, they're going to for me. The whole premise of student loan forgiveness and the federal government being the sole lender of student debt is totally, it's horrible policy, and it's something that Congress is really going to have to start grappling with in a meaningful way. I talk about it at length in the book, what other steps we should take and things we should do, but the whole funding of higher education, I think that the model has to substantively change, and the federal student lending piece of it that is solely done by the federal government also needs to change.
Here's something that's bugged me over the years. I know you've worked on this. You hear about these rape cases on campus and charges of other assault and how the universities are handling those cases. Little old me says, why don't you call the cops? I don't know why these are matters for a university. It's a matter for policemen, courts, jails, and so on and so forth. Is that naive?
No, I mean, I think there's a lot to what you say about specific, especially in the cases of, that violent a sexual crime.
You read about them every week, it seems.
Yes, but as we know, the Obama administration issued a letter that told college campuses how they had to handle all kinds of matters of sexual misconduct, and they really, although the letter did not have the force of law, they basically bullied institutions into following it, and in the process, essentially created kangaroo courts that denied all too many students due process, that went after young people for things that they said they weren't even issues to them. A third party could go after and file a complaint and open an investigation. It was a mess. Now, of course, these are serious issues. Many of them are, heinous. But there was also a move to basically make almost anything anyone said a matter of sexual misconduct. So a lot of free speech issues were being called into question. So we, of course, went through the proper process to put out a rule that has the force of law, that is a fair, balanced, reliable framework for all institutions to use. It puts those who are on the complainant side in charge of what happens. If they choose not to have a formal investigation, but simply say, I just can't see this person in my class, can I change classes? The school has to accommodate that. And it really does set up a much more logical, humane, compassionate framework. And now we have the Biden administration attempting to totally rewrite the work that we did. If they come out with the rule they have proposed, it will do away with due process. A single person at a school would be the investigator, the judge, the jury, and then the administrator of whatever was decided. And due process would not be honored or respected in any way. Now, I think it's against the law, because there have been lots of cases that have affirmed the importance of due process. They also, importantly, are going beyond and expanding the definition of biological sex to include gender identity, gender dysphoria, and basically anything anyone decides to be at any given point in time. And so, that area also is one for a lot of legal challenge, again, depending on what they finalize in a rule. But if they do what they propose to do, it will essentially negate Title IX in many respects, because most of us have gotten to know Title IX around the ability for women to access opportunities for sports along with their male counterparts. And now the Biden administration is setting it up so that young men, biological males, can decide they're going to compete as females on girls' teams. And so it essentially does away with, it will destroy women's sports if they come out with the rule as they have proposed.
On the subject of sports, just a quick question. I'm a dinosaur. I'm one of the last 11 people in the country who think that college athletes shouldn't be paid. All my friends think they should. They have very good arguments. Do you have a view of this?
I don't have a strong view on it. I do appreciate the fact that young people have, as athletes, have a limited time horizon for doing what they do well. But I don't have a dog in the hunt, so to speak. And it really is, I think, a matter for good debate and discussion. I think there are good arguments on both sides of it. But I think in the whole situation, I think what needs to happen is it needs to be really clear what the rules are. And I think we can all agree that in many cases, college athletics have become a primary income generator for higher ed institutions. And so that obviously is a huge factor in it too.
You're a free speaker.
Indeed.
I bet you like the Chicago principles.
Yeah.
Now, does this apply to only public universities, like the University of Missouri, Mizzou? Would it apply to Franciscan University? I think you argued a bit with your socialist-leaning econ professors at Calvin, I think you told me once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How far do you go with this free speech business?
Well, I think it's a foundational principle for any education institution to encourage the free exchange of ideas. I think in terms of private institutions, of course, whomever decides to attend a private institution also signs up for whatever the framework is.
You pay your money and you take what you get.
So, but to be surprised about what that is probably not a good thing. But I met with the president of the University of Chicago to specifically talk about the Chicago principles and how they actually enforce them, or how did they actually implement them. And he just said that it was at that time going around and talking with leaders of other institutions who say, we want to do the same thing. But he said they put basically the Chicago principles out there, but then they don't do anything to actually encourage that they're followed and supported and honored.
There are police violations of them.
They don't, well, not even, I wouldn't say policing in a negative, but they don't model it. They don't make it a priority to say, well, no, wait a minute. You might not like what he or she said about that particular issue, but this is what we are. We're here to learn how to debate ideas and to hear things we might not like, and to then be able to form our arguments to counter that thing we don't like. But there's all too many of the higher ed institutions today that say they're for free speech, but when it comes right down to it, they don't actually stand behind individuals. Many faculty sometime when they're particularly conservative faculty who say things that might
that's
not.
right. Yeah. Few more here. One is kind of a Barbara Walters style question. For the young people in the room, she was a very famous television. She was a household name. She would ask something like, what's the worst rap on you? If you don't want to answer, I will. But,
You mean-
there are a lot of raps on you.
Pick one of many.
Okay, I'll pick one.
Okay.
You're a rich lady who doesn't care about the poor. And I say you're a rich lady who could be doing anything under the sun, who instead has spent decades trying to improve the lives of poor people. Because the lives of rich people are just fine, certainly where purchasing education is concerned.
Yeah, that's
What
a
a bad
tough
interviewer
one
who asks a
to.
question and answers it both.
But I mean, that does distill it down, and it's very frustrating. But then again, I keep reminding myself there's only I have an audience of one that I pay attention to, and that keeps me focused on what I believe my call has been, which is to advocate for these families that haven't been able to advocate for their own kids to have the education they want for them. And so when I see what's happened, like if there's a silver lining to COVID, it's that millions of parents and grandparents and friends and neighbors have awakened to the failings of a system that I have long seen and tried to fight against. And so there's just, anytime I get discouraged, there's something that happens that is just a little bit of positive movement in the right direction, and that keeps me going.
You told me once you attend a lot of events, including at some very swanky places, galas and so on. And you're usually ushered through the back, through the kitchen and so on. And the workers often appreciate you more than fancy people do. And I say, Jeff Rose sitting right there, one of the great campaign managers, why don't you run for office?
Why don't I run for
Yeah.
office? I like helping other people get elected to office, and
It's always the ones who
I-
want to run who don't.
yeah, I've never had an aspiration to run for office myself, and I'm a grandma to 13 grandchildren now, and I kind of like my family, and it's the last 4 years, the 4 years I was in Washington were not easy ones for my family. It was more difficult for them to see me attacked or criticized than it was for me. But that also, they also really appreciate and respect everything that I've set out to do over the years. And so, I mean, I never say never to anything, but I have no aspiration to run for office.
The last question from me is, what in Washington, in your Washington experience, surprised you pleasantly or unpleasantly?
Well, we could be here for a long time.
Go ahead. We're settled in.
Well, I knew going to a federal agency that it would be large and bureaucratic, and it would be tough to get things done, particularly a conservative agenda. But I did not fully appreciate how formidable the bureaucracy and the whole federal workforce is. And how
there was
and how
resistance
rules,
to your reforms.
Yes, and it wasn't just at the Department of Education. Though I do think some of the most ideologically opposite people reside there permanently. And so that was surprising in a sense. Now, there were some very good people that we found there to work with to actually get a lot done. but we had to work around them a lot of the time. And we said early on, I really do not think the Department of Education should exist. There are 2 laws that the department currently has to enforce: the protection of civil rights and the support for students with disabilities. But those don't need to have a federal agency. They can be in other agencies too.
We used to have HEW back in the dark ages.
Yeah, and remember, the then Secretary Joe Califano actually said when Carter was implementing the Department of Education that he thought that was a bad move, a bad idea. And I reference that in the book as well. Quote, use one of his quotes about how he disagreed with that move to establish a federal department, that it was a matter best left to the states.
Before we have further questions, do you care to applaud?
Rural areas are kind of concerned about, how does this school choice thing work in a county seat of 7,000 people that's maybe more than 60 miles away from Kansas City or St. Joseph or something. And so, who's working on a blueprint for what you do with all of that publicly funded property, backed by bonds and things like that, if everybody gets to choose? I mean, do we let smaller groups use those facilities, or has this happened somewhere? How would that work?
Great question, and some of the most stiff opposition to expanding education freedom has come from rural elected officials who are afraid of what that might mean for their district. But the reality is, if you think more broadly about what education freedom can actually look like, it doesn't mean that another school building that has to be built next to the one that exists. What it could mean is, there's maybe a handful of kids in that building that would do better with a different pedagogy or approach to learning than they're getting today. There's no reason they couldn't work out a deal with the existing school to rent or lease a part of the school, have a little micro school there. Or students within that school who, for the most part, the classes are working, but they really want to take a class that they can't possibly get because there's not enough demand and there's not a teacher to teach. They could take it virtually from perhaps the finest instructor somewhere on the other side of the world. But we just have to think more broadly and creatively about what that freedom could look like. And certainly there will be a transition period where, people find their way. And for, the schools for whom, the kids for whom their school is working, there's no requirement to change. It's really just a matter of allowing the freedom for the ones who need something different. And I like to cite Florida because they're the most advanced with the greatest number of choices. And what they found in Florida is, in the districts where the highest percentage of kids are going to a school other than their assigned one, the achievement levels of all the kids in that district has risen. And you can speculate why that is. I speculate that it's, the kids for whom their assigned school wasn't working are in a place that is actually working for them. And the kids that stayed there are the beneficiaries of changes that they're now making because, whoa, we're losing some kids somewhere else. Maybe we better do something differently. And, oh, by the way, now we have some benchmarks to actually look at that are doing things better than what we're doing. And so it's really a win-win for everyone. And it's still a very nascent system. I mean, there's still lots more that can happen in terms of freedom there. But it's a good snapshot on what could be.
Daryl, one more minute if you don't mind.
Please.
Yeah. There's a romantic side to me about schools, Betsy, and I like the idea. It's very old-fashioned. It might even come from old movies more than real life. But there's the public school in town, Everyone knows each other. They all go. The teachers are sort of heroes and coaches. You play sports, there's cheerleading, there's ice cream social, there's the prom, there's the annual musical. It's all very sweet. Is that just over? Are we just done with that because the society has changed so much?
I don't think it's over. I think that for some kids, some families, that's working fine, it's working well, and I think those kinds of examples will continue. But we'll see some new examples of new kinds of ways of getting together and learning, and they will complement what is there. And that romantic notion will still be there, but it will probably change somewhat because they will realize that maybe they need to do a few things differently also, and that's a good thing.
Here's someone who doesn't fear the future, Reagan-esque.
Yes, it's true.